So the last cycle that we're going to talk about is the nitrogen cycle, which is, again, another essential element to life because we need nitrogen, particularly for protein synthesis in our bodies. This graph also highlights some complex chemistry concepts that we're not going to get into, and I'll generalize for you. So nitrogen is going to be, it's the most common element in the atmosphere. So most of the air that you breathe is nitrogen already. However, that's not how we get the nitrogen that we need for our protein synthesis. The nitrogen has to be fixed to make it usable for our bodies. So that process can happen in the soil through a couple of different processes where basically bacteria is going to change the nitrogen so that it can be used by plants, and later those plants will be eaten by animals, and that will be how plants and animals take in their nitrogen. So we have nitrogen fixing bacteria, they change it into nitrogen that can be used by plants, and then those plants will be eaten by animals, and then those animals will contain nitrogen as well, and our bodies that eat the plants and animals will have nitrogen that's necessary for life. Sometimes some of this nitrogen is going to be released through ammonia, and that could lead it back to the atmosphere. Sometimes the nitrogen is going to leach into our waterways, and this can happen through fertilizers as well, which can cause harm to aquatic organisms through that eutrophication process of algae blooms. Nitrogen can be fixed sometimes because of lightning, and that could enable it to become part of the soils. It's packaged as fertilizer, and that's another way that it could be introduced to the soils. When organisms die and decompose, those nitrogen fixing bacteria are going to return the nitrogen to the soil that way as well. And there's also some complex processes like denitrification that are going to release nitrogen from soils back into the atmosphere. So there's several complex processes in the nitrogen cycle, but what's most important to remember is that nitrogen is the most common element in the atmosphere. Through several processes, it can become part of the soil, where it's going to go through nitrogen fixation, which is going to make the nitrogen that was in the atmosphere usable to organisms in the biosphere by fixing it. And then once plants can take in that nitrogen, it's going to be used by the plants, and it's going to be used by the animals that eat those plants. Too much nitrogen in the water is a bad thing because it can lead to eutrophication or loss of life in these aquatic ecosystems.